So we're not really that funny of a couple of guys, but I'm going to ask Chip a few interview questions for Whisker and Adity. So we're in the middle of our expo today, and we have about 1,500 people running around outside.
Which is awesome.
Yeah, we're having a really good time. And I'll just start. So Chip, looking back to when you were a kid, and this is a serious question, what do you think was really important influence into what you're doing today? Like what things did you see that motivated you to go the direction you've gone?
I don't know. I just like things that work and like the idea of making things, and probably not much more than that.
Well, okay, how about this then? When you were little, you had this blue book, and it was about physics. And you went on these really long family trips. You'd bring it with you, and you'd open it up, and then ask Dad about these questions. What about things like that? I mean, didn't that have some input to who you are today and what you're doing?
Yeah, I guess so. I just have an interest in those kinds of things. I like physical phenomena and electronic things and audio things and rockets and planes and whatever. Taco machines.
Taco machine. Tortilla machines.
Tortilla machines.
There you go.
So a few people asked me, why the tortilla machine? One guy thought you wanted to feed a lot of people easily for low cost.
Yeah, well, that's what tortillas are good for.
Uh-huh.
I had a question someone asked me earlier. Are there any tortilla machine specific operations in the new chip? Just so...
No, I think the simplest microcontroller could probably handle tortilla production. There's not a whole lot to it, unless maybe you get into like fault sensing, looking for defects in tortillas with a camera, but otherwise the machinery pumps out, goes through 20 pounds of material a minute, and it's a very flow through process. It's purely mechanical. And
the problem is that the tortillas are going to come off the machine so fast that you have to have people that receive them and stack them. Otherwise the tortillas will pile up on the floor and then back into the machine.
Oh.
And you'll have a total shutdown.
Yeah, I guess that could happen. Well, there are counter stacker machines to alleviate that. So as the tortillas come off the end, they go into little rubber belts, and then they get singulated, and it'll, you can dial in how many you want, and then once it achieves a stack, I think it pushes them out of the gate, and then it blocks the gate again, so that someone can then take that stack and put them into a plastic bag, and then clip it and seal it. But otherwise, it takes like maybe 3 or 4 people at the end of a quad line just to grab the tortillas manually. But a new counter stacker is like $50,000, and
wow.
We don't have $50,000. But we do have a counter stacker we got for free that requires some rebuilding, and it looks like it was made in the 1970s, and it has really funny old electronics, like single-sided, naked circuit boards with I don't know what soldered onto them, but.
Are you planning on creating your own custom solution to replace the electronics in it?
No,
yeah,
it's not.
I think it would be probably more practical to put modern electronics into that rather than try to find replacement parts if needed to fix what's there. It was all an old electromechanical thing.
We're gonna go to Weird Stuff Warehouse down in San Fran, or wherever it is. We'll see if we find any tortilla counter stackers for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think the tortillas, and I'm willing to support Chip, but I think it's like a therapy item for him to be able to make tortillas, because he's always involved in everything high tech, and work is pretty draining, and I know as we get older, it's harder to do the same kind of work we do effectively. So it's an outlet. It's a hobby.
Sure.
Am I right?
It's easy on the brain, yeah.
Yeah, it's a simple mechanical system compared to something very elusive.
Yeah.
How much more complicated would you say that this current design that you're working on with the Prop 2 is compared to the work that had to go into the Prop originally? Is it vastly more complicated, or?
Yeah, well, the circuitry is about 10 times the complexity, so there's a lot more stuff in there, but what is challenging in doing this, for me, it's not the implementation so much as it is thinking about how to structure things so that they're going to flow well when someone goes to program it, and it's going to be effective, and it's going to be fun, and it'll be able to grow into things that we haven't thought of yet. So it was the initial framework of the first prop, kind of working with different architectures, or experimenting on FPGAs where we have maybe many different processors that share a set of peripherals, or maybe one CPU that multiplexes where it's getting its instructions from. And so I worked on that beginning in, I think, about 2000 or so, and then after about 2 years of that, I realized the best recipe seems to be many simple processors, each with their own set of simple peripherals, because anytime you start muxing anything, you wind up, it becomes the bottleneck. So it's better to have local memory, simple processors, simple peripherals married to the processors, and then step and repeat those things and tie them together in a way where they're equal and it's all kind of peer-to-peer. So having done that work, the Prop 2 was kind of easier because they had a general framework in which to put everything else. So it all kind of fit in nicely. So with help from our customers, we added polygon rendering, at least the part that does the slice of the polygon as you draw it on the screen. So it modulates RGB lighting, and then alpha blending, and then the UV texture coordinates, and there might be one other thing I'm not remembering. And then Andre Lamoth helped with that, and then later Roy Alton came, and he said, hey, because he does 3D stuff all the time, he thought if we can mirror horizontal and vertical by using, stealing a bit or two from the config register, and then we can also take that byte you're not using out of 32 bits, because we had RG and B bytes for pixels, the top byte was ignored. He thought we could use that as like an alpha blend per pixel. Yeah. So he enhanced it quite a bit. So there was that, and then I put some stuff in there. I always wanted like hardware Gortzel algorithm, and there's a lot of orientation towards sinuses, so that it can input and output sine waves really well. And sine waves are complex when you're trying to do them digitally, but in terms of nature and natural phenomenon, they're kind of like a square wave. If you look at the Q of a sine wave, it's like this. So it's that's important that it's spectrally narrow, because it's the basis for doing all kinds of measurements and interesting stuff that can.
So I have a customer that wants to make a really nice graphical, like a multi-tone display with fading like you see on a PDA or a smartphone. Can Propeller 2 do that?
Yeah, it can do, right now on the FPGA it's doing 24-bit per pixel 1080i, which is about as maximum as you can get as far as I know. The trouble with doing that is it takes a lot of memory bandwidth, so to be able to have an interactive screen that you can not just display but work on the data content for, you need to scale back to something like either 1080, or did I say 1080i? I meant 1080p. Progressive. 1080p. So if you drop back to 1080i, your pixel rate halves, and then you start having more time you can affect the memory rather than just tying it up, reading it for display purposes. So if you go to 1080i or 720p or 720i, then you can open up a lot more memory bandwidth, and you can do things like like a little, what do you call these things? Like a
smartphone display.
A smartphone display. So yeah, it'll be able to do that kind of stuff.
Well,
it's very easy. It's much simpler than it was on the Prop 1, and also all the video data is held and handled in terms of RGB components, as opposed to just this happenstance phase thing that we did on the first Propeller, where you can, there's a fixed modulation level, and then you can pick the phase. But to make one color, you might have high amplitude and a little bit of modulation, and to make another color, you might have low amplitude but high modulation. So moving all that modulation off into hardware and maintaining all data in RGB formats really simplified the heck out of a lot of stuff, and it made it so that now by maintaining like one graphical image, you can then display it on any kind of medium you want. You can go NTSC or HDTV, of which there are a couple color spaces for, or RGB, which is just the direct RGB data. So now it's going to be really nice in terms of flexibility.
I really want to use RGB to get better graphics, and that's been hard for me.
Yeah, RGBs.
I like the quality of the RGB, but the ease of the TV objects.
Yeah, well, TV is simple if it's just the one signal NTSC or PAL, but then when you get to HDTV, you're back to RGB and numbers of signals. You've got red. What do they call them? There's PB, PR. Anyway, I don't even remember these names.
I don't even know.
Peanut butter. And
they're broken down, and there's a matrix equation that translates the RGB into the 3 levels of this other protocol, and then there are syncs that are a little bit different.
Now,
signals.
can I ask, so obviously first spin is where I know nothing, because I still know pretty much nothing. You're the business side of Parallax, kind of, right? So, how much did you understand of what he's saying?
I'm a user, and so I could use what Chip produces, and I can write some simple programs to do basic things around here, to do concurrent control, and I can drive displays. But if I have trouble, I call up Chip, and I ask questions, and he puts it in really simple terms, and he starts out by saying, well, you're making it too hard. You got to break it down to little pieces,
Sure.
and achieve it in really small steps.
Sure.
And then he makes it easier. So.
And were you interested in electronics before he... because he got into electronics, or, like how did you end up deciding
Well, I'm interested in it mostly as a hobby, but what I really do around here is mostly business, run a business and run the operations and manufacturing. And I'm interested in all that part, really. But I really appreciate and understand the necessity of what we've got and getting it to those commercial customers. Sure. So I've been focusing a lot on that.
Sure. I just think it's interesting because, I'm the quasi-business person, I guess, for Whisker and for toy makers. So, I could easily kind of sort of do just that, but I wouldn't have a flipping clue as to what in the world, he was talking about, unless I actually got into it and actually worked with it and experienced it. And so I just think that's interesting.
Well, I have to try to translate what Chip says for some of our customers into the when and how much numbers that they're always looking for.
Sure. Now, so who's older?
We aren't telling you.
Oh, all right. Well,
he was born in 1969 or 70. 1970, and I was born in 1967.
Oh, older bro.
I could say this: we kind of need each other.
Yeah, I can see that. If you're wondering,
so
I can see that. Yeah. So
I know Chip, and I know how what he's like, and I know how to support him, and I know his hot points and his needs for R&D, and.
Yeah, you can't do what Chip does with a lot of distractions around.
Chip needs freedom.
Yeah. Yep. And you can't be worried about running a business and doing PR and all that sort of thing when you're trying to concentrate on something as elegant as a propeller or an improved propeller too. It's just not possible to do both at the same time.
Funniest story about him, and for him, funniest story about him. Like maybe when you're kids or even at work, what have you.
I'm only thinking of inappropriate.
Yeah. Well, I have one. I can start.
All right.
So these stories really repeat themselves an awful lot, but when we were growing up. But definitely one that comes to mind is Chip got this Apple II at one point that was brought home from my dad's aerospace company. And usually on Friday he'd start tearing it apart, and on Sunday night it would go back together before it went back. But after a while we got our own Apple II computer, and Chip and I shared a room, which meant the lights were on all night when I was sleeping, because I lived kind of a normal schedule. And he
falls asleep immediately when he gets tired.
I'd fall asleep and go to sleep, but every now and then I would wake up to this, I did it! I've done it! And it was, I broke Choplifter on the Apple II computer. But, that was the good side. And of course the other times, maybe I'd be the subject of his experiments with heat, electricity, water, or shaving cream while I'm sleeping.
Oh my. You look so innocent.
Well, I don't know.
So any good stories about Ken?
I'm sure there were, if I could remember. I don't.
Or even now.
In high school, Ken was kind of like, he was a popular kid, and he always had Varney sunglasses. And there was a lot of drama surrounding Varney sunglasses. And we get along fine now, but back then we'd fight a lot over all kinds of things. I grew up and I was always kind of self-conscious that my clothes weren't right because maybe it was just being in a public school environment. It wasn't anything I needed to worry about, but that stressed me out a lot. So he and I might each have like one good pair of pants or something, and being like similarly sized, I remember things like wash the pants at night before you go to bed, get up in the morning, put them in the dryer, and then take a shower, and then come down and put the pants on to go to school. And sometimes like my pants wouldn't be in the dryer, and I'd go to school and I'd see him running around with my pants on.
Thank you. Well, here's a funny one. I think Chip's first paid for a job, and they were all kind of like this. One was a paper route, and he had a 70 paper route in our neighborhood.
That's
and
pretty
Sundays were always really hard because papers are really big.
Yeah.
And he just wouldn't get out of bed, and he just would decide to disregard the job. And at that time, people had the paperboy's phone number. And there was one Sunday morning when Chip had finally just given up on the whole thing, and I don't know where were Mom and Dad, they were gone. But people started calling, and I said, Chip, what do I tell him? Tell him I went to Hawaii. Tell him I died.
That's great.
Yeah, I remember going to deliver papers, and there's one street where all the old people lived on. They'd all be out and they're congregating in their driveways discussing why their paper's so late today. I eventually got fired from that job.
Wow.
And then the first really big job you had, which was for Alan Needham, it was a paid job. He had to come over every day and get you out of bed.
Yeah, he had to animate me to make me do everything. Yeah.
It just didn't work.
Now how do you do now? You get up?
Well, I'm really excited about everything these days. I'm pretty self-motivated, but
Sure.
At the time, in those instances, it wasn't me controlling my destiny very much, so maybe I wasn't so motivated. I should have just done the job anyway, like the paper route. I did. I got people their papers, but they're often late. And there was like a rash of complaints, and eventually the guy who managed our routes in the area, he just had a talk with me and said, look, it's just, how about you not deliver papers anymore? I'll find another guy to do it. And I was fine with that. And then, and with Alan Needham and Needham's Electronics, that was a job that went on for a year, and that was Parallax's one of the first big things we did was make his firmware for his device programmer, and that took a whole year, and he paid us like $50,000, which at the time seemed just so amazing, that we're going to earn $50,000, but it ate my life up for a year, and towards the end I was getting really bored of it, but Alan was, he would come, he'd get me out of bed at my house, take me to work if I wasn't there yet, and make sure I had sandwich, and he'd park me at his house while he went to his office, so he'd have like sandwich stuff in the fridge that I could eat while I worked.
Wow.
I'd go.
That's pretty cush.
Take me home. Well, yeah, it was, he knew that I might have needed that kind of oversight to get anything done. And I'm a really horrible manager myself, and I'm really glad Ken has a knack and a desire to manage people, because I hate trying to motivate people or trying to get them to do anything or follow through. It's like,
just do it.
Yeah, just
enjoy it.
The guys I work with, like Jeff Martin and Bo Schwabe and the Synthesis guys, they're all self-motivated. So if we talked once every 6 months, we'd still all be on task together and probably in unison. And so the only guys I can work with are guys like that. But Ken's good. Ken he sees people better than I do, and he has like a better perspective, so he's able to work with a broader range of people that I probably could deal with. I just would get frustrated and demotivated trying to motivate other people. But Ken's a rah-rah guy, and
let's go.
He rallies the troops.
Yeah. So a lot of the people that we know who work with Parallax propellers are hobbyists. Yeah. So, but this is kind of your job, I guess. Now, what kind of hobbies do you guys have then in turn? Is it continuing work, or is it something else?
Ken has lots of hobbies.
You
Ken and I actually have kind of similar hobbies. I've gotten kind of out of shape in the last few years. I was running a lot. I'm not doing that right now, but I need to start because I feel kind of like a sausage. But Ken has stayed in good shape. So a lot of his hobbies revolve around outdoor things. He likes to snowmobile up where he lives and hike, and he takes. I've seen these videos of the quadcopter out on some frozen lake, and he's got his boys hiking with him. And my family's a little more sedentary that way. We don't get out as much, but we both like to build things. We both are into like making things out of metal. So he got a lathe and a mill a few years ago, and I've been doing that for a while. And I just got a TIG welder. I've been learning to weld some stuff for the tortilla thing, and
cool.
So we both, there's a lot of overlap there. We both kind of like mechanical things.
Sure. Cool. Very cool.
That's pretty accurate.
Cool.
Yeah. Our parents bought us tools when we were little. Quite often in our bedroom, we had a big workbench that had a Dremel tool, a bandsaw, and soldering irons. Yeah. And we always would go on Saturday and Sunday to get balsa wood.
Yeah, we go to Standard brand paints and buy bags of balsa, and then make all kinds of
flying contraptions,
spaceship-looking things. Because the little scroll saw, move the wood through it, and we could, make really.
I remember when balsa wood was a big thing.
Balsa was great.
Yeah, it's been a while since like kids have gotten into that, I guess.
Yeah.
I remember when I was a kid, they would, we would have balsa wood like airplane kits or whatever, but these days, balsa? What's balsa?
And we also made bombs.
Yeah, lit off like rocket engines in our bedroom.
We did ballistic testing in the house.
Yeah, but when we sold our house, there were BB holes all over our bedroom walls, and closet doors had BB holes in them, and probably some drill bits shot into the wall. But I remember we had Dremel tools also, and those things are like 30,000 RPM. I remember
putting something on it and winding it up.
Yeah, or like we had those little Cox engines with the propellers. I remember putting the propeller on the Dremel tool and turning it up, woo, like a breeze, and just shredding toilet paper. And the room was always a mess.
I guess you could say being left home alone was a great thing.
That's awesome.
Well, our room was like a. What would you call it? It was like things were always like blown up and spread all over the place, and there were lots of smells. And
people would stay for days sometimes too. Some of your friends.
Yeah, well, like cousin Kevin would come up with his friends, and their
or Lance Wally.
Or Lance Wally.
He'd stay for 2 days at a time.
Yeah. Our dad was great about getting us tools so that we could. Make little things.
Sure.
We were always doing that, but we didn't really have any like ability to deal with metal at all. But we could handle wood. Okay.
Well, you talked about milling machines at that time in the 70s.
Yeah.
And I never knew what they were until I was 30-something years old.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, thank you for sharing, guys. That was really fun.
Thanks, guys.
You're welcome.
All right. Thanks for your interest.
We post videos all the time, so don't forget to subscribe. And follow us on Twitter at TYMKRS.